Alright, here we go with another more of the Great Ace Attorney 2, guys. So it seems like we're almost done with our first investigation, and we might be heading off to a trial to come. So I hope you all continue to enjoy watching, and let's do this. Alright everyone, and we are back. So what I intend to do right now is move on to the Gyardeb's room. 21st of February, the Gyardeb's room. Here we are again, the eccentric landlord's eccentric top floor abode. We're here because Mr. Gyardeb's the one who discovered the incident this morning, don't forget. Ah, you chaps, huh? Yes, good morning, sir. Thank you for your cooperation in court yesterday. It was quite a trial. As much for Mr. Gyardeb as anyone, really. Came straight back here after all that business at the Bailey yesterday. Didn't expect to wake up to more bally nonsense this morning. I wonder if you wouldn't mind telling us exactly what happened, Mr. Gyardeb. Yes, I suppose you'd like to know all about the dead loss of an actor chap in the ground floor room. Those were exactly Inspector Gregson's words, weren't they? Ah, time to converse. It must have been a real shock for you this morning. I hear that you discovered what had happened. Ah, well, that hopeless actor chap rises at 5 o'clock sharp every morning without fail. But at 5:30 this morning, he still hadn't lit the gas. So I went down and knocked on his door, but no bally answer. And that's when you broke into his room by kicking down the door? Well, I called on that rum-looking Japanese chap to do the grunt work, of course. Wasn't it a little premature to kick the door down? The man could have just overslept by half an hour. That's very true, Mr. Naruhodo. If 30 minutes oversleeping warranted such behavior, I'd have to kick your door down every morning. Well, you know, better to be safe than sorry and all that. Is it just me, or is he avoiding our gaze now all of a sudden? Except that it was a sorry situation indeed that you found on the far side of the door. The victim's name is Mr. Shamspeare, I believe. Is that right? Yes, William Shamspeare. Took the ground floor room 3 months ago now. And how would you describe him? In a word, destitute. Destitute? Well, let's face it, the only redeeming feature of that room is the cheap rent. Anyone wanting to live in a place like that is either broke or has a bally screw loose. So hard to choose which category Saseki-san would fall into. Mr. Naruhodo, that's a little rude. She's psychic, man. She can read my thoughts. He was doing research as well. Research? Into what? Shakespeare, of course. Shakespeare. Read a few plays of the old bard myself, you know? Romeo and Hamlet and all that. Yes, William Shakespeare is England's most highly regarded classical playwright and author. He's known as Sao in Japanese, as you know, and many of his works have already been translated. It seems incredible that Shakespeare was shortened to Sao. Someone was too heavy-handed there. There were a lot of costumes in the victim's room actually, weren't there? Of course, Mr. Natsume is a scholar of English literature as well. I imagine he and Mr. Shamspeare would have had much in common. Shakespeare interpretation disagreement leads to shocking murder. Let's hope it's not that. Mr. Naruhodo, really, how rude. Alright, yesterday's events. After Mr. Natsume's trial yesterday, you came straight back here, I believe, didn't you? Did you notice anything strange between then and this morning? Well now, must have been about 6 in the evening by the time I got home. Snow was coming down rather heavily as I remember, and it was completely dark already. That failed actor chap was out at the time. Mr. Gyardeb noticed there was no light from his room or something, I suppose. Couldn't summon the energy for anything much, so I just sat in front of the fire up here. It was after 8 before Shakespeare got back. And the chap was up until past 1 in the morning, I'll have you know. Suppose he met his end sometime after that. I was asleep by then, so I'm rather in the dark there. Well, thank you. That was very illuminating. That was a little too detailed from... Is everything alright, Mr. Sato? Well, I was just thinking it's a little strange, that's all. Mr. Garrideb, you are up here in your room all evening if I understood correctly. See? Even Tsusato knows something's up. Not a big fan of stairs, not with this blasted leg. Then, how is it that you seem to know? The precise movements of your tenant on the ground floor, I mean. That's a very good point. I can't imagine that you could hear noises from the ground floor all the way up here. Does this old man like to spy on his tenants? Is that it? I say, I know what you're thinking, and it's a bally outrage. I'm ex-military, don't you know? I don't go around spying on my tenants. Why would I? Then how did you know, Mr. Garrideb? It's the gas, woman. The gas tells me everything. The gas? Oh, speaking gas. What on earth do you mean, sir? How can the gas tell you anything, let alone everything? Well, as you're probably aware, the gas is supplied to the building by pipes. Yes, I'd more or less worked that out. Every room in the building is connected by a single pipe to the gas main outside. And the gas company supplies gas to properties via the main. Yes, I understand that too. Let me see if I can explain. Let's say I was to light the gas lamps up here. What do you suppose would happen? Well, obviously the room would get brighter. Exactly, but at the same time, the lights in all the other rooms of the house would dim for a moment. What? They dim? Why? Perhaps it's because when you light a gas lamp, it briefly uses more gas than usual. And that reduces the amount of gas in the pipe for the other lamps that are connected to it. That might explain why the other lamps dim momentarily, mightn't it? Yes, of course, because everything's connected to a single supply pipe. Is that supposed to happen, though? It sounds rather undesirable. Jolly good point. Fact is, the gas company's pipes in these parts are pretty hopeless, long worn out, and barely got any gas in them to start with. Opposite's also true, of course. Extinguish the lamps up here and they glow brighter in the rest of the house. Ah, right, I see. So, by watching the flickering of the lamps in one room, you can determine what's happening elsewhere. You've got it. Oh, of course, because when people come back home in the evening and before they go to sleep at night, what they're guaranteed to do is either light or put out their lamps and fires. Clever. In point of fact, the room on the ground floor and the one above it use slightly different amounts of gas. By watching the lights in here closely, I can work out almost exactly what's going on in the whole house. Gosh, that's fascinating, Mr. Garrideb. Absolutely fascinating. Oh, well, nothing to it, really. And I can't really see that it's going to help us with the case either. What I'd like to know is why Mr. Garrideb is so interested in what his tenants are up to in the first place. I feel like there's more to it than idle curiosity. Well, we've done as much investigating here as we can, I think. Perhaps we ought to go to the prison and speak with Mr. Natsume again. A good idea. Alright, we are out. "21st of February, local prison cell 9, and there he is again. Look, Mr. Naruhodo. Mr. Natsume, have the police finished questioning you now? Locum student, Mr. Naruhodo Esquire. Oh, yes? What is he? Tell me, is he a ghost? Is he here to haunt me? Let me guess, you're talking about Mr. Sholmes? He actually calls himself a great detective, Mr. Natsume, not a ghost. But his diabolic deductions, they're not of this world. They've left me. Ah, cursed! I'm cursed, I tell you. Well, that sort of hurts. Credit where credit is due, Mr. Naruhodo. You were heavily involved in deduction, too. Yes, moving on, we have some wonderful news. Oh, the victim that we all thought was dead has come back to life again. Now, in the absolutely worst case, you could only be tried for attempted murder. That's great, isn't it, Mr. Natsume? It's terrible! Oh, I'm stuck in this cell, suffering for some silly wrong end of the stick. You did it, didn't you? Confess you're a killer. Why the mustache? Constant questions. I'm so sorry to hear that. Ah, that selfish shyster. Make up your mind. Are you dead or alive? If you were going to come back to life, why bother dying? Wicked, wishy-washy William. Well, it seems likely that Mr. Shamspear was never actually dead in the first place. Ah, yes, that might make sense. And I'm pleased that he's alive, of course. Our lively debate last night was much fun. I'd be sad to think it was our last. Oh. Oops. Mr. Natsume, does this mean that you did see the victim last night? You met with Mr. Shamspear, didn't you? I'm not saying another word. I demand to have a lawyer present. Who do you think I am? Please, Mr. Natsume, we need to hear your side of the story. Why am I cursed like this? Can you tell us exactly what happened last night then, Mr. Natsume? There's nothing to tell. But, Mr. Naruhodo Esquire, I'm eternally grateful to you for helping me with that accursed case yesterday. The case that saw poor Miss Green hospitalized after she ended up with a knife in her back. It's hard to believe that was only yesterday. After the trial was over, I trudged my weary way back to my lowly lodgings. And that evening at past 9, it must have been, I visited Mr. Shamspear. So, you did go to the victim's room then? As we feared. I didn't do anything wrong! I'd never been to his room before. It was the first time! Then, what made you decide to go? I bumped into him when I arrived back at the house. We got chatting, and it developed into a discussion. But he had to go out, so I bade him farewell. That ties in with what Mr. Gerdeb said, that the victim went out and came back after 8. We met again later that evening, at around 9 or just after, when I took him some nice tea and I brewed as a gift. So it was you who brought the tea that had clearly been drunk at the scene then. And I suppose you were discussing the works of Shakespeare, were you? Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. Romeo and Juliet! Who was the stronger? It was a delightful debate. I'm sure. Such a stimulating subject! Shakespeare! And the debate became very heated, so you slipped poison into Shamspear's tea? No! Never! Not at all! Team Juliet won, that was me. And when I left his room, that flamboyant fellow was fighting off, I swear it, categorically. Mr. Natsume, you often say the same thing about yourself, I've noticed. That you have a cursed existence. I'm sure I mentioned this to you before, but I've been here in Great Britain for a year now, and in that time I've learned that it's no place for me. It can be very trying to live in a foreign land and adapt to the ways of another culture. There are foreigners everywhere I look, and they all stare at me. They all laugh. That's the impression I get whenever I go out. It makes me scared to leave my room. Which is why I've become a recluse. But even in my room, I find no respite from my fears. I've moved more times than I can remember, and then 1 week ago I moved into Briar Road. But why? I mean, why did you choose that place? It doesn't seem very comfortable. Because the rent is cheap. I have so little money, it spoke to me. The rent? Obviously, there's a reason why it's cheap. Because the room is cursed. Cursed? Cursed how? The previous occupant, the man who lived there before I took the room, died there. Oh no. He was only a young man, but one morning he was found dead and no one could explain why. Surely no one would want to live in a room with a history like that. I didn't. When the letting agent recommended the place, I wavered. But I want books, and books cost money. A horrible history is a small price to pay. When I realized it would mean I could buy more books, I signed the lease like lightning. Brave or blinkered? But after I moved in, I soon came to realize what I'd done. I realized how horrible that room's history really was. Gosh, was it really so awful? How did the room's horrible history affect you, Mr. Natsume? What happened? At first, it was just a feeling. The feeling of beady eyes boring into my back, watching me. Do you think that might just have been your mind playing tricks on you? No. My mind doesn't know any tricks. It was someone else. It's been one long nightmare ever since I was given the keys to the place. A nightmare? You've been having bad dreams, you mean? All the souls who died in that room lean over in my sleep and try to strangle me. That really is horrible. And now I come to think of it, it happened again last night too. Oh, hold on. The very same night that Mr. Shakespeare was writhing in agony from the poison in his body. I was on the verge of being suffocated silently by those miserable spirits in my room. You simply must move out that room as soon as possible. Yes, you're right. I know it, and that's why. I'm already searching for the next room with all history to call home. I think perhaps you should try to avoid accommodation with any kind of history at all. Otherwise, I'm scared that you yourself may become history. Ew, Chisato-san knows how to make the man listen. Of course, Mr. Lord of the Manor is worried about the curse in my room as well. You mean Mr. Garrett? Yes, he knows that if people keep dying there, he'll never be able to rent it out again. Well, that's true. I, for one, wouldn't go near the place. Ah, perhaps. That may explain why the landlord pays so much attention to the gas lamps and his tenants' movements. You mean because he's worried about their well-being? He doesn't seem to have an unusually keen interest in the amount of gas in the pipes. There must be a reason why he keeps such close tabs on the occupants of his let rooms. What do you mean? He pays so much attention to the gas lamps? Oh dear, no, nothing to do with you, Mr. Natsume. Please forget I said anything. Oh, now you're talking about me behind my back as well? What's important is that Mr. Shakespeare isn't in fact dead at all. Once he comes around and he's able to tell us what happened, we'll be able to get you released. Yes, please. I do hope you're right. Ahem. Excuse me. Inspector Gregson! I couldn't help overhearing what you just said, and on that note, I have some good news and some bad news. Oh, which do you want first? Always, every time, the bad news comes first. When hope is all you have, hold on to it. That's my guiding principle. Right, well in that case, the good news, it is. Huh? Sorry, but it's just a lot easier to explain everything that way. Then why did you ask me my preference? As you might have heard, the victim, Mr. Shakespeare, was just unconscious. He's come around now. Yes, we saw it happen in all its terrifying glory. He's still being treated by the doctors, but we managed to get a written statement from him already. Oh, isn't that wonderful, Mr. Natsume? Oh, thank goodness, it's all over then. I can leave this somber cell. Sorry, no, that's not on the cards. What? Whatever not, Inspector. Mr. Shakespeare has implicated someone as being responsible for what happened last night. Implicated someone? Oh dear. You don't mean... I'm sorry to say, I do, yes. He's pointing the finger at you, Mr. Natsume. Ah! By sweet poison did he seek it to end my life. That wicked caitiff Sasaki Natsume. No! So I'm afraid you'll be appearing in court as planned. You'll be wanting to make the necessary preparations. No! And so once again, Sasaki-san found himself having to take the dock in the Old Bailey. Whether his room was haunted or whether he was just terribly unlucky, I knew I had no choice. The following day, I would represent him in court and do my almost exact break to break that curse that blighted him. Alright guys, to be continued. I'm going to end the video here for today. Thank you all for watching. When we come back, we're going to continue onward.